Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Okay, hello. My name is Charlie Camarda. I was an astronaut on Space Shuttle Discovery, flight STS-114, the return to flight following the Columbia accident. I'm going to be host for you on Leading Edge Discovery podcast series, where we are going to be talking with experts from around the world on the importance of science, technology, and research. First season of episodes stressed aerospace and research and what we do into solving complex problems on aerospace systems. We focused on the technical, and what I'd like to do now is really segue to the real important causes of these accidents, which are the social and behavioral causes of these accidents. I am honored to have as my guest today a world-renowned expert in the field of organizational behavior and teaming. And team performance. Dr. Amy Edmondson is the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at Harvard University. She is the author of over 75 articles, 7 books on psychological safety. She's world-renowned for her work in psychological safety. Some of her recent books are The Fearless Organization, Creating Psychological Safety in the Workplace for Learning and Innovation and Growth, and The Right Kind of Wrong, her most recent book, about the science of feeling well. Amy, I want to welcome you to the program. I'm so thankful for you being able to do this. I know you're very busy, and thank you. And I want you to go ahead and tell us about your journey, how you came to do what you do.
Oh, boy.
And you've done so much. I know it's going to be difficult.
No, not at all. Thank you, Charlie. Look, I mean, speaking of someone who's done so much, it's my admiration and awe are fully activated by your journey. So my journey was circuitous, but without going into too much detail, in my late 20s, I got interested in the idea of the learning organization. I was working as a sort of consultant in the field of organizational development. This was after a stint as an engineer, a structural engineer. Anyway,
a stint as an engineer, where you were chief engineer to
Buckminster Fuller, who was, of course, wonderful.
Fuller.
And that is important, Charlie, because he was such an inspiring, energetic, curious, inventive person. I mean, I was really moved by him and his ideas.
And quite a first stint, right?
Yes,
and
yes.
I think what makes you so interesting, Amy, is that you had that engineering background, and then you segued into where your passion.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's true. It's partly it's mostly that I discovered my passion was related to people and how we interrelate in complex organizations, to do really sometimes amazing things like send a shuttle into space. And that's just an enormously complex, collaborative activity, and it's hard. And so I realized I was more interested in and probably better equipped to contribute to issues around human behavior than the technical details of such enterprises. And Bucky Fuller did play an important role in my thinking, for sure. And of course, as smart and technically impressive as he was, he had a larger vision, which was, how do we work together to make this world work for everyone? Aspirational, to be sure, but he spoiled me. He really spoiled me. He made me think that work could be kind of noble and inclusive and exciting, and it certainly was working for him. But then life goes on. He died. I wrote a book about his work, and that experience led me to meet a wonderful visionary thinker in the realm of management and organizations named Larry Wilson. And this was the mid to late 80s. And I worked with Larry for several years and ultimately was doing lots of work in big organizations that were trying to transform their cultures to be more collaborative, more innovative, and so forth. And it didn't take me too long to realize that my training was inadequate. I did not have a background in business or psychology or any of the rest. And I did have a passion for these topics. So it occurred to me a decade after graduating from college that it was perhaps a good idea to pursue a graduate degree. I had no idea what I was in for, mind you. This is pre-internet, so there really wasn't an easy way to learn what doing a PhD was all about. But lo and behold, I found myself back in a PhD program. And as I said earlier, I was truly motivated by the idea that organizations must learn in a world that keeps changing, and the teams that are in them must learn. And that's not a given. It's in fact, there's all sorts of factors that make it hard to learn. I mean, of course, one is the technical complexity of the world around us and the technologies we use. But another, and the one that I began to narrow in on, was the interpersonal challenges of speaking up, especially speaking up with mistakes, speaking up when we aren't sure whether something is right or not. And can I just say so when my boss or my boss's boss are in the room? Most of the time, people will internally, maybe not even explicitly, but they will internally conclude, no, I can't, right? That's just not possible. That's just not done. And what I have since called a psychologically safe environment is one in which I'm not saying it's easy, but you absolutely are confident that it is done, right? That this is what we do around here because of what's at stake, right? We speak up even if we're not sure. We just do that, right? So my journey was circuitous. My passion was developed relatively late, at least in career terms, but it has remained undiminished over the last 30 years or so in this field.
We're so much alike, and the difference is I spent my time in my PhD on the engineering side, on the technical side, and I dove into the social, psychological, behavioral side after the Columbia accident.
Wow.
And so I read all of your papers, or I don't think I read all 75.
Nor should you.
But I don't know if this was your first paper, Psychological Safety and Learning Behavior in Work Teams.
It was my second.
It was your second.
Well, technically third, but the second in this vein.
And this is where you really hit upon the psychological safety. And I know we talked about this before, and you said it didn't become famous until Amy Rozovsky at Google all of a sudden tried to figure out which teams were successful. And she said she had to do it through this lens of psychological. She couldn't, and imagine a data scientist at Google not being able to do this. And when she looked at it through the lens of psychological safety, she realized that this was, and she used the term, I think, underpinning, that this was the most crucial thing for a learning organization and
Yes.
successful teams.
Julia.
Yeah, Julia.
Not Amy, Julia. Yeah, you
Oh, God.
okay. Julia Rozovsky. Yeah, and she basically, when she put this variable in the model, it explained more variance in team performance than any other. So that got her interest. And I think her way of explaining it, which is now my way of explaining it, is it's not a driver of effectiveness. It's the underpinning, right? It's the substrate that allows you to do the things you need to do interpersonally, especially for great teams.
And, I would love to get with Amy,
Julia
and Amy to figure out what algorithms could you use to identify and look at this behavior through this other lens, so that we can identify that. But the other thing that's great is is your eureka moment during your PhD dissertation, where you were studying medical teams. Can you
Medical
talk about
errors,
that?
yes, yeah.
Medical errors.
Yeah, I was studying, and again, part of my overarching interest in organizational learning brought along with it an interest in error, because mistakes are, of course, one of the things that we must learn from in organizations, and we can't pretend they don't happen. They do. And so when I was invited to join a larger team of medical researchers studying medical error in hospitals, and this is in the early 90s, when this is a very new field of research. My small part in this larger study was to assess, using a validated team survey instrument, the teamwork levels and capabilities of these teams to see whether better teams made fewer adverse events, fewer drug errors. And given the degree, the 24/7 operations, the degree of collaboration and coordination that is needed to deliver safe, high quality care, it seemed like a pretty good prediction to me. And then unfortunately, the data, when I got them from the medical investigators, I had the data from the team survey, but they then gave to me their collected data on error rates, which were collected by, going around and talking to people, frankly. The correlation between teamwork and error rates was exactly the opposite of what I had predicted. My data were suggesting that better teams had higher, not lower error rates. Now, that was terrifying, confusing, problematic.
Better teams had lower.
No. Better teams had higher error rates.
Right, but your hypothesis was
my hypothesis was the opposite. So it was just dead wrong. I was dead wrong. I had failed. But the eureka moment was a couple hours later when I thought, well, wait a minute. This doesn't make much sense to me, but maybe better teams don't make more mistakes, produce more mistakes. Maybe they're more willing to report them, right? That if you think about this kind of work, unless a mistake is really catastrophic, it's pretty easy to hide them or just not talk so much about them. Figure out, make sure the patients are okay, but not report. So I was beginning to think maybe these better teams were just more comfortable talking about reality, frankly, because this is complex, error-prone work. Were they willing to say so? And those were the seeds of psychological safety right there.
Probably. And think about this. If the outcome was more severe, more critical, lives were lost, you're probably more prone to hide your mistakes.
Well, yeah, no, it's true, but it's hard to hide. You can't hide a death in a hospital, right?
Oh, right. But
those are rare. I mean, we all die, but they aren't the normal outcome of a patient's stay.
But the thing I want to say, and this is what I think distinguishes a researcher and that research exploratory mindset that you talk about in your book, is that you were a researcher, Amy. Something didn't sit well with you, and you kept digging. You kept digging deeper. That stop, challenge, choose.
Yeah. No, you're right, and it's maybe we should. Sometimes you're right, because sometimes researchers, sometimes it's seen as provers of ideas rather than as explorers of the unknown. And I was trying. Of course, I had an idea. The idea didn't get supported. So then the next thing you must do is say, well, what's going on instead?
The easy road would have been, I'm going to try to prove why this data matches and come up with
some weird explanation. Yeah, because maybe the good teams are just sort of happy-go-lucky. Maybe they are sloppy.
But it was your gut feel that there was something wrong there.
There's something else. Yep.
And that was that eureka moment. And look at what this has become. Psychological safety, people are talking about it all over the place. Your book, The Fearless Organization, is tremendous success.
Yeah, I wish people would read the book, because unfortunately, a lot of that talk out there is not grounded in the actual research or the things I've said,
Eh,
people are using the term to mean being nice, being comfortable.
That's right. And this goes together with attribution. Did Amy Rozovsky ever reference your work? Because it's clearly lifted from this paper,
Well, it was on
and
purpose, right? I mean,
yeah.
she's not hiding that. She's
No,
celebrating it because she went to the academic literature to try to understand what do we know about teams and found my variable and used it, which is what one does. She was a, very smart,
right,
thoughtful person,
but right,
and it was a good predictor.
but academicians would have
Yeah.
attributed where the idea came from. But
I think she does, or at least
he does.
in
Okay.
the Charles Duhigg's
Okay.
article,
Good
it
for
says,
good for
she went
Julia.
to the
Good.
literature anyway. So yeah, no, she's a very, very thoughtful person.
Yeah, and so this is amazing. So now everybody is getting it, but they need to read your book to truly understand it because it's very subtle, and people think it's very easy to fix,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
apparently it's not.
No, it's not. I mean, it's because it goes against so much of human nature, and particularly human nature in a hierarchy. We have programming that leads us to want to look good, and it will always be easier to hold back than to lean in, right? If I there's the old saying, stay silent and be thought a fool, or speak up and be known a fool. We have lots of messaging that says, if you're not sure, wait and see. Let your elders or let your seniors speak. But the person who's closest to the problem, or the most recent graduate from engineering school, may be the one with the brilliant insight. And so you need to very proactively create an environment where that is seen to
It's
be true.
and you also talk about leadership in your book and how this is something that really you need very strong leadership and leading by example to show that your money, you're putting your money where your mouth is. That
Yes,
this
yes,
is valuable and this is why. And
yes,
and so you talk about rewarding failure and heroic
yeah.
failures. And that's critical, right?
Right, right, right. I mean, you want to, so leadership, I mean, I think leaders fundamentally have three tools to influence the behaviors of others. And one is how they show up. As you said, the being a role model, expressing curiosity, expressing the fact that you don't know everything. We don't know what's going to happen here. This is new territory. And also the messaging, the values that you choose to emphasize. And then finally, your responses. If someone speaks up and disagrees with you, are you appreciative or are you annoyed? You better be appreciative. And so you're trying to create, really the simplest way to put it is, you're trying to create a learning environment, because you are
Environment.
dependent on a learning environment for long-term success.
And really, that's how Julia came upon this psychological safety. I believe I remember reading that she had some negative experiences in study groups, right?
Oh,
And
yes, that's
then
right.
right, and then
Yep,
she
yep.
said when she went to another university and she had a study group, it
Oh,
was
yeah.
so different because she was allowed to not to look the fool,
Right,
that she could
right,
ask questions and she wasn't looked down upon if the questions weren't
right.
weren't as
Exactly.
smart. And so that's very interesting. But they all go hand in hand. Amy, you work in psychological safety, then failure, and of course, it all is wrapped up in how teams perform and the successful teams, right? And so your second book was on failure, and I love that book too, The Right Kind of Wrong. And you talk a little bit about, what is the right kind of wrong, and you talk about three different types of failures. You want
Right.
to talk a little bit
Sure.
about that?
I'm going to start, I don't usually, but I'll start right in the middle with the complex failures, because we started with your interest started with the Columbia shuttle accident, and that is a quintessential complex failure. It is a failure. A complex failure is a failure with multiple contributing factors, not a single simple cause or mistake. It's not that somebody just went in and did something wrong and that caused a failure. That happens, right? I can give you countless examples. I call that a basic failure, which is caused by one thing, generally in familiar territory, and that one thing is technically a mistake. But a complex failure is one that any one of the contributing factors on its own would not have led to this terrible outcome. They had to come together in the kind of perfect storm. So with Columbia, we had recurring issues of foam shedding from the solid rocket booster, and occasionally leaving maintenance problems on the shuttle. But they were considered and generally were small. Over to you.
That was the perfect storm. I mean, because remember, on that mission, they did not go to space station. They had taken off the robotic arm, so there was no way of inspecting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That was the
small things. Lots of small
perfect
things.
Storm. That Swiss cheese model where all the holes lined up. But then it was ambiguous. But this is where I think I differ a little bit, because maybe there should be a third column in that we had knowledge. I mean, I think the people on the ground should have known that this was a serious problem and not ambiguous. As you
well, that's absolutely, but that's where the cultural bit becomes a contributing factor, because the culture was one of you need, if you're going to speak up, you need the data. And that's a catch-22 in this instance, because, and the data that could have been called for, the imagery would have made it unambiguous for sure.
Yes. And really the fact that they did not know, and it was they should have, and this is where I disagree with Diane Vaughn, who would never point fingers at anyone.
Challenger. Yeah.
I believe, and so the response was different. I believe you can't point fingers on some of these, but I think the response was different when you talk about Gene Kranz and Apollo 13. There you had, it was clear. It was clear there was a problem. You had definite action.
Yes.
And so
and I talk about that a lot, right? I mean, that's when something is clear cut, then it's a crisis. And we have a different response as humans in crisis than in, there you go.
That book,
have a chapter
you'll work on the recovery.
Right, the recovery window, which is a concept, right? It's there a priori, but you have to recognize it to take advantage of it. So
we had plenty of time, but the beauty of, and that's an amazing book, Organization at the Limit, and your paper with
Mike Roberto,
was extremely important, and everyone at NASA should read that paper, because at the end of that paper, you talk about how do you fix this problem? How do you fix this problem? Instead of going to a confirmatory response, you go to the exploratory response.
Yes. And that, of course, that takes us to intelligent failures, because intelligent failures are those that happen, when we are explicitly exploring. Like, we know that we don't know everything, and so we are thoughtfully experimenting. And by thoughtfully, I mean, we know we're in new territory. It's in pursuit of a goal. We've done our homework enough to know that this might have a plausible way of working out. And it's as small as possible. Right? We have not taken undue risk with human life or our budgets or our reputation. And nonetheless, we have a failure. That's an intelligent failure.
And the exploratory response that you were recommending in that paper, you and Michael Roberto, and I think there was one other author, exaggerate the threat, direct the teams in problem solving, acting rather than waiting.
Yep. And I won't say, I'm just push back on exaggerate, because we use the word amplify, which sounds like exaggerate, but technically, it's not exaggerating it. It's giving it a voice, right? Here's the microphone, just so we can listen to it long enough to decide how bad it is.
That's a very good point. It's a very good point, Amy. I think it might say exaggerate in that particular paper, but I think the word you want to use is
amplify. Yeah, you might be right. You might be right. In right after that, in a paper that's much easier for everyone to find because it's not in a book, it's Harvard Business Review. We developed and much shorter too, and not as good, I would argue, but still good enough, called Facing Ambiguous Threats, right? And we'd argue that this is just organizationally a very hard thing because when it's ambiguous, you get that wait and see automatic response, and you need to instead, dig in and explore.
And the natural, I think, Michael Roberto, and you say it in the paper, the natural response, the cognitive bias when facing ambiguous threats is to underplay.
Exactly, to downplay them because you are, it's probably okay, right? Yeah, we have these kinds of almost rituals of reassurance that were definitely present in the Columbia management team discussions, that we've seen this before, right? Right. These rituals of reassurance are at odds with learning. Now, I do have to go.
So you really have to retrain.
Yeah, you do. You have to retrain your brain, you have to retrain your team, and you have to sort of alter your organization's culture.
And so that's like the second half of your book is how do you do
that? What are the competencies?
Because
and I'll say this briefly, and then I have unfortunately another meeting I need to go to. But I talk about in the competencies as self-awareness, and that of course is a crucial aspect of leadership, but it's an important competency for all of us because it allows us to deliberately shift from knowing to learning, right? To deliberately re-engage our curiosity. And situation awareness, which is about what kind of context is this? Is this a life or death dangerous place? If so, let's be vigilant, right? Or is this a playroom where we can have some fun and stakes are low? And then thirdly, system awareness. Can we be a little more thoughtful about how the different parts of the system interrelate and could give rise to undesired problems?
Amy, you're very busy. You have to go, but this is something I would love to have you back to talk about how do we fix these problems?
Sure.
Because, the organizations that try to change their culture, NASA, Boeing, and many in the medical field also,
yes,
80% fail. So how do we do this? 80% that try to change their culture, because culture isn't easy to do. Changing the culture is not easy to do. Amy, thank you so much. I could talk to you for
a pleasure.
Hours and hours.
Likewise.
If we can get you back.
Okay, we'll do it. Sorry to cut it short. And
that's okay.
Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
Happy New Year, Amy. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSP Magazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.